Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to JIT CAD Cam's YouTube channel with none other than your host, Fusion Phil, over here at JIT CAD Cam. Now, if this is the first video you're catching, we are starting some new segments as requested that are a much slower tempo as we walk through and explain much more of the options inside of different toolpaths, as well as what we're kicking off today, which is going to be our turning setup, how to implement these, some neat tips and tricks depending on what you're doing. And at any time, if you guys have questions, feel free to leave them in the chat section as this chat is live. You can also go ahead and drop a comment down below if you're watching this at a later date. Now, I will also recommend that if we are still moving too fast for you, or if you're looking for a custom application, we do offer custom one-on-one training from online to in person, as well as when we dive into this later, post-processor type items. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if you're looking for the mill section, we actually did mill yesterday, and you can actually find that video on our YouTube channel. We also have a couple of beginner classes that are very short to just outline the use of Fusion and the different workspaces. But kicking off today, we're already inside of our manufacturer workspace, so we've switched from design to manufacturer. As you guys can see, I've already got a file uploaded as well. Now from that, we are inside the turning tab. And if any of you are looking for this file and would like to work along, probably slowing down this video or pausing along the way, it is the quick release hub inside the default Fusion library. So again, down in the cam samples, you can find the exact copy of this part. Now, jumping into this, as we like to say, rule number one, and I cannot stress this enough, is always a left to right, top to bottom workflow. So again, as you can see, if we go ahead and start at our very first setup tab inside of Fusion, we're always going to be working down these menus until we can kind of jump to another menu. So kicking things off right off the start, we're going to go ahead and say a brand new setup. Now, as you can see, because I am inside the turning tab of Fusion, it is automatically actually oriented my setup to turning. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this window out to see these a little better for you. So as you guys can see, the same rule applies. As we work through this today, we are going to work down these menus until there's nothing left. And then we will then officially turn the page, as I like to say, like reading the book, again, top to bottom, left to right. This will save you a ton of hassle and a ton of effort. So let's start with what I would refer to as the first paragraph, right? So as you guys can see, is we need to select a machine. Now, for a lot of you out there, you may or may not have a machine. If you're doing lathe work or mill turn, you're going to notice that there is not machine simulation inside of Fusion, but that does not mean that we can't set up and utilize a mill turn or a generic machine. There's a lot of value in this, and I'm not going to touch on this. Again, we have other videos to show you how to build a machine definition, or you can use the support email address down below. But as you guys can see, it's really neat to be able to tie my post to the machine. In this case, we're going to go ahead and hit cancel here. It also does tell you things like limits to RPMs, machine over travels, things like that. So moving a little bit further down, we have our operation type. Now, this is going to be a general overview of turning and the basics of setup, but this is where we not only define what kind of process we're doing. As you can see, I could switch out to milling if you have bad habits like me, or are we on our primary or secondary spindle? Again, depending on your machine, you may have a main and a sub spindle. So given this is our first setup, we're going to go ahead and stay on our primary spindle. Moving a little bit further down, now this is where things are going to differentiate from the milling side of the software, is because by default, it has actually already jumped us into selecting Z and X. So a good explanation of this is when we're dealing with the lathe, more times than not, you're always going to use Z and X because your tooling, although you may have a Y-axis lathe, is going to come in for any turning tools on the X. Again, a basic 2-axis lathe is almost always X and Z, or I should say Z and X. So this is the most common option. Another automated feature here is if I move down a little bit further, you're going to notice it's actually already picked a face, which is going to be real ugly to see. And because I have a jig and fixture inside of the software, it's probably picked a face that I'm not ideally going to work with. So what I want to do is I actually want to define a different face, and I like to just pick something round on my part. Now, as you guys can see, by picking a different cylinder face, it has actually automatically flipped my Z-axis to point the other direction. Now, it is common that I think people do confuse this. Let me get me orientated around. So thinking about this, looking down on my part, right? My tools are always coming X negative, right? Because we want to get to X0 center line of our part. So that is why these arrows are always pointing in a positive direction. Again, on my Z axis, we're usually starting out here at, say, Z 1 inch, and we're traveling, say, Z negative 2 or 3 inches into our part. Again, we need our Z pointed at where our tool is going to come from. This is a little different than milling, but if you always keep this in mind when we talk about secondary spindle here a little later, you'll see why that application is so important. So again, we're going to go ahead and move down a little bit further. As you guys can see on this part, there's not really any flat profiles to work with. So I could define X in a specific direction, or I could leave it standard, but the same rules apply. And this is where I'm going to actually show you guys. Super neat thing is X axis from a point. We could also use an edge or a surface. So if I go ahead and pick this edge on my chuck, you're going to notice my X axis is now pointed to that point. It is not perpendicular, so just keep that in mind, guys. Is if I wanted to get more perpendicular to that, I could go ahead and grab the edge, and now you'll see my X is aligned to more or less the center of that bolt. Or I could be utilizing a face in the event that, once again, I have a flat to select off of. In this case, I'm actually going to unselect it just to keep my life easy. And if you guys didn't know, yesterday I complained a lot about this to Autodesk. Again, Autodesk, I feel like we need to move the model up, because as you guys are seeing right now, upon continuing down this list, we need to define now the origin. I did fail to tell you guys, this is a two-part system, right? So you have an orientation and then you have an origin. And the reason why I mentioned that is because if we were model orientated, which is the world coordinate system up here in the top right, if you're familiar with something like Mastercam. But the model orientation is not the same as my part orientation. So again, that is why Fusion has automatically decided you have something round, this is turning, we probably want our Z-axis to run through the center of it, so why not automate the process here in orientation? So the second part would be is setting our origin itself. Now, this is something that I don't know why. I do know why, but it's to be debated. I don't care which way you guys go about this, and I'm going to explain both scenarios here. So option one is we are going to go off stock front. This yellowish box that you guys are seeing, it's actually a cylinder. Again, if I rotate sideways, you can see it is a round cylinder profile, but we are currently setting our work offset off of the stock front. Now, when it comes to the G code, to be able to run this, you're going to notice all your G code has whatever that distance between model and stock is incorporated into it. So a more traditional approach for a lot of people is to actually go off of our model front. As you can see, my WCS has now shifted in. Again, based off my G code, if you're looking at the code and looking at the machine coordinates, things like that, you will see that your G code aligns much better to the machine controller or the part profile at the end of the day. Me personally, when I'm dealing with setup ones, just like on the mill, on the lathe, I like to go off some portion of the stock. In this case, we're going to go ahead and go off stock front because it would be very easy to touch one tool and set my work offset. So from here, we're going to go ahead and continue down a little bit. As you guys can see, we have the ability to set safe planes. Again, you're not really going to ever mess with these unless you have to. Now, what these are referring to is this safe Z. This is where we're going to wrap our tools to before going into our part and starting our part profiles. We can also set, in this case, a chuck reference. Now, I do luck out because I did model a chuck inside of this file. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to say a selection here. And then I can pick a face, as you guys can see. And then instead of being negative sitting behind that offset, I might want to sit in front of that for 100 thou, kind of a safety window. Again, we're ignoring that stock right now. Just the shape is all we care about. We're going to get it adjusted down. But again, by setting a chuck reference to that 0.1, when we talk about toolpaths later, we can use that to our advantage. So again, we're going to move down a little bit further. We need to define the model at which we are going to machine. So this is where I think a lot of people confuse some things, because it is much better in the event you're dealing with an assembly or jigs and fixtures that we structure our file with components. This allows us to utilize rest machining when we get into our setup twos. As you guys can see, upon selecting my model, also my argument to Autodesk why models should be one of the primary things we select, not later in the setup, but it's automatically grabbed that hub in this case, and it's now resized my stock down to it. As you guys can see, as my safety boundaries didn't really move any, again, because we are set stock front to a selected face, or you could still be using model back by all means, if that's the case. And then if we went in and we said minus 0.4, you'll see that that green line is shifted back. We might be a little close for comfort, but either way you go about this is more than acceptable. So a few more things here. As you guys are seeing on my part, this is a perfectly round part. Again, I can't stress this enough. We don't have flats. So a spun profile is going to work quite well for us. Again, no flats. Sometimes we will have errors with holes that are intersecting, and we will not see this on this part, but just know you can always turn that on and off and adjust the tolerancing of the part. Sliding down a little bit further, you guys now see that I have the ability to add in a fixture if I wanted to. Again, not really going to take precedence over the lathe toolpath side of things, but if we were going to do something with mill turn at the end of the day, then we would definitely want to add our chuck in, especially if you're working between the chuck jaws, things like that. We're going to leave it off for now, and I'll add it back here in a moment. But since we're now at the bottom of this page, I will stress to you guys that if you have undocked your menu, you may not see all of the options because you're too far down. Now, again, you can click and drag this over at any time, and you will see a blue or a green line. You'll release and it will snap, giving you the ability to scroll in these menus. But let's go ahead and turn our page, right? We're going to go to the next chapter or the next page. And as you guys can see, we can now define our stock. It is very important here to do your work coordinate system prior to doing your stock, because they do reflect across both of them. Not as defined as the mill where it says X, Y, and Z, but as you can see, the diameter of my part in this case, let's say we want to open that up to a 3-inch diameter. You're going to see my length right now is 2.5 inches. Now, for a lot of you, my part is centered, which is not normal. So I would probably want to offset from front. And then, as I like to say, accommodate for how bad your saw guy is. So let's say he cuts a pretty straight line. I only need about 30 material in front of my part. And if I zoom in this a little bit further, you'll see we have 30 here, and then we have some odd number back here. So this is one of the things that I will express to you guys is when I model my stock inside of Fusion, I don't want to set it as if I was holding on to it from the chuck jaws, because when I part this stock off and go to my sub spindle or flip it over for setup 2, it will interfere. And a trick to this, as you guys can see, my model length is 225. Well, I can add in 30 there. That's 28. And then if I'm going to use something like 100 or 120 thou part off tool, I'll throw that into my numbers as well. So I could actually get away with here, maybe taking this all the way out to, 2.35, for example. And as you can see, that gap in the back is much smaller. Again, we can always fix this later when we get to a part off and realize that we have a little disc hanging out in the background. So from here, again, we've completed everything out. Now, my recommendation for you guys is to always use fixed size cylinder or fixed size tube. Again, we are dealing with a lathe. Had we gone fixed size tube, we would have actually gotten a center hole. And again, this is going to help us a ton with tooling later. But as you can see, if we were to work with something like relative, it's going to just round up very generically based on your model size. Handy if you're getting some raw cut blanks or something out of plate, but unrealistic considering my stock dimensions do not align to nominal standards, which for most of you is how you order your material. So again, We're going to go ahead and go back to fixed size cylinder. As you guys can see, I now have model dimensions down here to make my life easy versus nominally whatever we ordered in to manufacture. So let's go ahead and turn the page one more time. This is where we're looking at our post-process menu. Inside our post-process menu, we have the ability to control our name, our number, comments, as well as our WCS system. So this is where, in my opinion, a little tip, a little trick you guys can use is I always like to use the last 3 digits of my part number, and then my 4th digit is what setup I'm on. So let's say for this part, we're working with 555, and then this is going to be setup 1. And then from there, I could, of course, give this a comment. So we're going to go ahead and say setup 1 for 555. And how you guys go about this, 100% up to you. I'm just here to show you that if you're going to spend the time, you might as well put it in your setup before you make a habit entering this in when post-processing later. We can automate the process. Moving down a little bit further, as you guys can see, my WCS offset is currently set to 1. A common problem that I see from people is they think the number you enter here is the work offset that you're going to create, and that's not the case. So in most post-processors, 1 stands for default or your first work offset. So what does that mean? 1 on a Haas is G54. 1 on a Fadal machine might be E1. So in the event that you type in 54 here, you're going to end up with like a G154 P36 or something, because it's 54 in theory plus 54 right now. So again, just keep that in mind. And I'm going to show you guys some tricks here. We're going to go ahead and go back to work offset 1. Now, on the lathe, it's not so much common if you were going to run multiple work offsets. This would be kind of if you wanted to run 2 parts out of a bar before a bar pull or something like that. So I'm not going to touch too much on that because it's such an uncommon workflow. So as you guys can see, we've now gone through all of our menus and we've completed everything out. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now, some of you are probably curious as to how did my part reorientate around automatically and how did it line up in my view space? This is one of those things that we highly recommend down here on the bottom of your screen. It's called synchronize and activate setup. It is like a yin yang or a circle with 2 arrows. Is if you go ahead and check all of these boxes, it will do just that. And an example of that is if I reorientate my part around because I'm trying to check a toolpath, at any time when I click the setup, you'll notice it snaps back around and aligns to everything. Sorry about that, guys. Been talking and I got a scratchy voice here. So, diving right on back in, we have now created our first setup. Now, some of you may notice mine does say setup 2. It doesn't say setup 1. I've made a lot of setups on this part over the years, which is why you're seeing a different terminology here. But this is also one of those things that I tell people, you can always relabel this, right? So you could say this is setup 1. You could say, first setup, whatever you feel necessary. I would highly recommend putting in something so that you can actually use this in posting to, again, put a signature on that part file, making it easier for your guys on the floor to read. Or if you ever have to rerun that program, it's all predetermined. Woo! It was a good cough, guys. So I am now going to go in, and this is, in my opinion, when I do something, I have a tendency to create my setups first before making toolpaths. Sometimes it helps visualize the process and making it much easier on me. So again, I'm going to go back up. This time we're going to create a brand new setup. And as you guys can see, off that first setup, this is where I need to make a couple of decisions. Am I going to use a secondary spindle, or am I going to flip this part over and stay in my primary spindle? In this case, whatever option you choose will not affect anything else that we are doing inside of Fusion. So as you can see, we have our spindle. I'm going to go secondary spindle. Notice how nothing has reorientated. The only thing that has changed is over here, you're seeing it now calls out secondary spindle. A few other things I need to do is I need to flip my Z-axis back the other way. So now if you're thinking on your sub spindle, and this is going to be the caveat, this is why I picked secondary spindle, is because if your machine does not flip its work coordinates, and what I mean is when we go to the sub spindle, we actually start traveling in a Z positive direction to get to our part. That is all handled in the post processor. So you don't have to worry about that. You just have to keep in that mindset that where my tools are coming from in Z. So you always want to point at basically the turret on your machine, which if I looked at this a little bit cleaner for you guys, is my turret would be sitting somewhere over here, meaning my tools come in left to right towards my part. Again, that blue arrow needs to point at the turret. The post processor will handle flipping the coordinates to be either Z positive or Z negative. Now, because I'm on a secondary spindle, or if you're in your machine on the primary spindle, maybe you have a stop in there. Maybe I have soft jaws, right? Again, I can change to something like model front here. So again, on my sub spindle, I might reference my toolpath from the model front. More commonly on the main spindle if you go set up to and flip your part over. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change it up because I would like to go off model back. Again, this might be a new concept to you guys. To me, I don't pay too much close attention to the G code at the machine. I pay attention to distance to go. And if I did have to bore those jaws out, I can simply reference off the deepest part of my jaws as my stop. So again, we're going to go ahead and scroll down here a little bit further. As you guys can see, we do have our safe Z planes once again. We are a ways out in front of our part. Again, this is an auto-generated number because if you can guess, if I go model front, you notice how that it's actually reduced that offset for me. So again, just keep that in mind. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go back to model back for our work offset location. And then I'm just manually going to override my offset to 0.2 and gets me a little closer again for rapiding my tools. Now, again, some of you do have to worry about machine collisions, your tool locations, things like that. Just know that we can always adjust that out. Again, our chuck reference for the sub spindle. We have a really good video, if you guys haven't caught it yet, on how to actually set up a simple chuck system, main and sub, as well as your part transfers and handling. Moving down a little bit further, we of course have our part. I'm going to go ahead and unselect this. And I'm going to reselect my component because this naming convention of our model does play into what we do. Scrolling down a little bit further, you guys are going to notice I don't have a fixture on my sub. I don't need to select it, which reminds me I could go add it in on my main. And then we're going to jump over to our stock tab. Now, this is very important at the end of the day because we are now carrying our stock from setup 1 over to setup 2, which means I would highly recommend for all of you out there to check this box and click the 3 little dots and save as a user default. Again, you're almost never going to uncheck this box and it will drive you absolutely insane the amount of times I get tickets based on people not checking or needing to check the box and they haven't. But again, everything as we see, I'm going to throw a few simple toolpaths on this here in a second, but everything from our preceding setup, again, setup 1 on our lathe is going to carry over into, I know I say setup 2 guys, but this is the second setup I made, even though it's labeled as 3, automatically. So we could jump to our post processor tab. Again, I'm going to go 5552, and then we could say, you know, setup 2 for 555. And then again, every machine is different. Some of you do what's called a work coordinate system shift. In this case, I'm actually going to run a second work offset when I go to my sub spindle. And number 2 would be G55. So again, Haas, Fanuc, a lot of them out there. If you're dealing with a Takuma or a Mazak, you might be doing a WCS shift, which again, those are different conversations more for our free support Friday videos that we do. So as you guys can see, again, my part has automatically orientated back around. And in the world of Fusion now, just depending on what setup I have activated is where my tool paths are going to go upon picking. However, we are now just going to basically program the main and the sub the same identical way. We may have some left-handed and some right-handed tools, but for the most part, it is a very easy walkthrough. Now, like I said, is if I ever needed to edit any of these at any time because I've made a mistake, you can double click on the icon. And now a lot of people overlook this, as the icon is the folder with the little cube, not the green check mark, not the little eyeball to the left. But if you double click on it, you'll notice it opens back up that setup. Or you can right click on a setup at any time and click edit at the top, again, opening that menu up. So if I wanted to add my fixture in now, I could go down here where it says fixture. I'm going to go over to my design tree, pick the fixture as my component. And now by default, when I jump between my setups, you'll notice my fixture turns on and off automatically, again, giving me much better visual representation. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and apply a simple OD roughing toolpath. And what you guys will see here with this OD roughing toolpath is my stock now has automatically been cut through, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on toolpaths, but as you guys are seeing, I see Taco Lee Man out there with the dot in chat. I appreciate it. Is there a chat going? First guy in chat's always a good time. But as you guys can see, we've now done some type of toolpath, which we'll talk more over the next couple of weeks. But if I was to click down into my second setup and I go ahead and square back up to my part, notice that that hard green color is the stock model of everything we've done up to this point. Again, this is extremely handy as we work through the system, and that's all being triggered by our stock in our second setup based on from setup. Tim out there in chat. Tim, great to see you as well. So as you guys can see, setups are not difficult, but they are one of the most important things inside of the software when it comes down to creating the very first step to getting any G code out of the machine. So if you guys like the content, feel free to hit the like, subscribe button. As I said, over the next couple of weeks, we are going to dive very deep into each and every toolpath, and I'm going to build out a lot of different scenarios for options that most of you had no idea exist. And I could say that because a lot of you out there will put in a support ticket and it's as easy as a checkbox to fix or get something to do what you want it to do. But as we say over here at JitCAD Cam, it's not what you know, it's who you know. You guys all know myself, Fusion Phil. We're here to help you in any way we can. So if you have questions outside of this, want a custom one-on-one demo, or looking for a more custom training type of evolution, as well as post-processor edits and ongoing support, you can go ahead and use the email down below to send us an email. You could also use the support email to put in a ticket and submit anything that you would like to see on this upcoming Free Support Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. So with that, guys, I'm going to leave you back to it. And I hope to see you here not only tomorrow, which is Workflow Wednesday, but also on Free Support Friday. Thanks, guys.